Our next session is going to take the conversation into the university. We're here in Trinity, but what is the role of the university in this conversation? And our convener, our facilitator for this is Professor Hannah Daly. Hannah is Professor of Sustainable Energy and Energy Systems Modelling at University College Cork, UCC. You might know her as a columnist in the Irish Times. She writes a regular column at a time of climate crisis, and the blog section of her website includes all her media articles, so you can find her here. This is a large panel. It's going to be a bit like a question time. We're not having speeches, we're having chat. So Hannah's going to keep everybody in line, keep us on time. Please welcome Dr. Hannah Daly.
Thank you. Oh, there you are. Thank you. Hi. I'll show you when it's 10:05. Thank you very much. Thank you. So you're going to keep me honest on time. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Let me get my timer up. So first of all, before I invite the panel to the stage, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the organisers in their vision and work in bringing this event together. I think this is the first event of this kind in Ireland, if I'm not mistaken, so I just want to really commend you. I know I'm not the only one who's very excited by being part of the conversation. This is such a topic that speaks close to many people's hearts, and we're really part of this movement. So in the first session, we saw a very important framing of the problem, and we saw compelling visions of what a future could look like if we went and reimagined growth. And we were left with a provocative question: who is we? Who has agency? And we know that many of us here, many on the panels, we're in a university, that universities have inherent transformative potential. And that's what the panel now are here to discuss. Before I invite the panel to the stage, I want to also say that we intended to have 3 more seats on the stage, but we didn't have space for them. And those seats were intended to think about not just who's we here, but who is this for? One of the seats is for past generations, so we wanted to honour past relatives for whom we could learn from children, young people, students and university staff killed in conflicts and climate disasters around the world, and whose voice has been silenced. And we wanted to have another seat for non-human species. They don't have a voice here, but we want to ensure that we think about this voice and reflect that in our conversations. And then the third seat is about future generations. And I want to, this poetry and song is not my skill, but I want to invite you to quieten your mind for a moment and think of a young person in your life, whether it's your child, your grandchild, niece or nephew, someone, yay high. And think about them now starting their life, and think about them in 2050. They'll be maybe mid-career. They'll be living through a changed world, through a changed ecosystem, through a changed climate. And they might be thinking about having a child themselves. And think about the child of that child, born maybe in mid-century, a very changed world. And think about that child in 2100. What world is that child inheriting? So have that in your heart when we're thinking about reimagining our world, our economies, and how we behave and how we act here. So this panel will explore the role of universities in rethinking growth and in promoting just transition and climate justice. And one of the readings that I read that really sparked my thinking on this topic is a paper called Agents of Unsustainability: Democratizing Universities for the Planetary Crisis, and it was written by Professor John Barry, who's already got name-checked here, and Callum McGowan. And this paper said, as highly resourced and influential institutions, universities have inherently transformative potential. Should the resources and activities be redirected towards progressive social and ecological ends which challenge rather than support the unsustainable status quo? And we know how unsustainable the current status quo is. And this paper is highly critical As producers and gatekeepers of knowledge and as providers of education and training, our universities play a key role in the reproduction of unsustainability. And that's what we're here to discuss. How do we harness that transformative potential? What is getting in the way? And how do we catalyze change through what we teach, through what we research, and how universities engage with society? So I'd like to invite the panel to the stage. We have a fantastic panel of 6 speakers. Linda Doyle, who is Provost and President of Trinity College. So welcome, Linda. So Linda Doyle served previously as Trinity's Dean and Vice President of Research and was the founding director of Connect, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Future Communications Networks, and as a Professor of Engineering and the Arts in Trinity. Secondly, we have Dr. Clare Kelly. So Clare is an Associate Professor in the School of Psychology and the Department of Psychiatry at the School of Medicine in Trinity, and a Principal Investigator at the Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience. Thirdly, we have Professor Anna Davies, also from Trinity College. I'm suspecting a pattern here. So Anna is a Professor of Geography, Environment and Society at Trinity, where she leads the Environmental Governance Research Group. You're very welcome. She's a founding member of Future Earth's Knowledge Action Network on Systems of Sustainable Consumption and Production and Future Earth Ireland. Fourthly, we have Dr. Sinead Sheehan, who's from the University of Galway. She's a lecturer in psychology with an interest in environment and health psychology. She's particularly interested in behavior change research, which aims to discover how we engage more people with environmental activism and research around climate-related mental health, like eco-anxiety and climate grief. Fourthly, we have Dr. Orla Kelly, Assistant Professor in Social Policy at the UCD School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice. She specializes in studying sustainable human well-being, eco-social policy, sustainable development, and the social dimensions of climate change. And finally, last but not least, we have Professor Jennie Stevens from Maynooth University. So Jennie is Professor of Climate Justice at the Icarus Climate Research Centre at Maynooth University, and her work focuses on reclaiming and restructuring higher education to better leverage its power for the transformative changes that are needed for a hopeful future. So thank you all very much for being here.
Anna, we've degrowthed the microphones, so
Okay.
there's 2.
We have
We've degrowthed on the microphones, so there are 2, so you're going to have to share them. Is it wrong to say it's like a girl band up here?
For once, I'm happy to sit on a very unequal panel. So I'm going to ask each of you to give your reflections on 2 main questions. First of all, the role of universities in rethinking growth, particularly in response to President Michael D. Higgins in his task speech last year, where he argued that we have arrived at a highly critical juncture where the dominant models of economic growth have been proven to damage social cohesion, democratic life, as well as the future of life itself on our fragile, vulnerable planet. So what is your view? Do you agree with this assessment? What teaching should we include and change throughout the university? And the second major question is, what is the role of universities in promoting just transitions and climate justice? So I'm going to ask each of you to speak for around 3 minutes, giving your reflections, and then we'll try to have a discussion, and hopefully we'll have time for questions from the audience. We're very tight for time, so we'll do what we can to bring this out. So would you like to start?
Sure.
Thank you, and it's great to be here, and thanks to all the organizers for convening us. And I think one of the things, and this is just mentioned in the intro, the power of higher education is bigger than we often acknowledge. Yet, external forces and powerful interests who are resisting change have recognized how powerful higher education is. And I think we really need to reclaim higher education for the public good. And I've been working in higher education myself for my whole career, so almost 30 years now. And I think the sphere of influence of higher education institutions is huge. And knowledge is power, as we all know. And we are in a time of concentrated wealth and power. We're talking about the inequities that growth paradigm perpetuates, and higher education has been leveraged by the powerful and the wealthy to persist and continue the narrative of growth as the only option. So I want to propose a framework that I use in my work on energy transitions and energy democracy, which is resist, reclaim, and restructure. So I think within higher education, I want to encourage and welcome and invite us all to resist, reclaim, and restructure higher education institutions. So first of all, for resisting, I would say we need to resist corporate influence. We see, I have research coming out on the influence of fossil fuel industry on higher education. For decades, they've been investing very strategically to promote certain kinds of research and dissuade other kinds of research. In terms of reclaiming, we have to reclaim economics departments, how we teach economics. We have to diversify so that people learn about feminist economics, ecological economics, well-being economy, donut economics, and I think we have to also, if anyone needs a book recommendation, Naomi Oreskes' book, The Big Myth, How Business Taught Us to Loathe Government and Love the Free Market. This market fundamentalism has been reinforced in our universities, and it's disastrous, and it's having all kinds of impacts. And the history of economics and its trajectory is outlined in this book, and it shows how universities have been strategically leveraged by corporate interests for decades to promote this narrative. And finally, restructuring. I think there's so many opportunities to restructure higher education institutions for the public good, and how they're financed. We need more public resources for the climate crisis that's coming. We need better and different kinds of engagement with communities. And I will also just plug really quickly, there's a new climate justice union for higher education, which is a new collective that many of us are working on, and we invite you all to join us in that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'll just echo previous statements. Thanks for the organisers. What's been like a really provocative meeting and positive so far. So I'm not really going to get into the first question too much in the interest of time. I guess in terms of the role of the university, so sometimes we talk about degrowth and post-growth, and words are used interchangeably. And the way I kind of see it is, if we think of the fetishization of growth as like a cancer almost on our society, on our ecology, on as we live. In a way, post-growth is remission, right? We have to get there. And within universities, it's kind of the job of these institutions and those actors within this institution, at least those well-meaning ones, to try to get there, you know, to try to invest in the treatment to kind of get us to that post-growth space, so that, and in a way, that's enriching for all. And some of the ways that I'm part of a universities network of, Julia on the last panel is on it, and others, and it's just academics working in this space around climate and environment, and kind of a support group almost. We started during COVID. And some of the ways that we've kind of thought about this is, if we think of the university as having kind of 5 domains. The first being research, and kind of getting to Jenny's point earlier, that, you know, thinking strategically about, you know, what research is given, what research methods do we engage in, you know, from whom do we accept funding within ourselves, and both at the kind of institutional level from administration. The second kind of modality is education. And one thing that has come out strongly from this network that I'm part of and others is, one thing that I certainly feel unprepared for, and I'm sure many others in the room feel the same, is how do we make space for grief and emotion within our classroom? If we think about it, and getting back to Professor Murphy's earlier point about kind of getting back to feminist values of care, the antidote almost to how we've gotten here is to kind of acknowledge the whole person. And some of that is coming through in our classrooms too, as these young people are kind of getting trained for a future in some ways is never going to be the same and doesn't exist. So to acknowledge that, to prepare ourselves and to reach out to each other and to administration for our support for us and the students to deal with that. The third is service delivery. How do our universities interact with others? You know, and one way that we do that is through interacting with professionals, say professional development, CIPD, and other things. And there's lots of opportunities here, given that we've got access to key decision makers. You know, having current students aren't going to be in those positions of power for quite some time, so it's great to engage with professionals. But we also, to the previous speaker's point, we also need to be cognizant of how we can get pulled into greenwashing and kind of being aware of the ways that we engage that aren't used for nefarious ends to kind of be complicit in keeping business as usual going. Four, nearly there, is public debate. We've seen this it's never been more clear in terms of students engaging in their form of public debate in terms of protest against the Palestinian bombardment and other things. How do we, as university community, how do we support students? How does the university respond to and support academics and others as we go out into the world and interact on these issues? You know, is that something that's workloaded at a very practical level, or at the very least, is it something that, you know, our free speech is really supported? And finally, the five kind of domains as we think about universities in this kind of idea of climate crisis is campus operations. So the easiest way to think about that is kind of these, you know, green roofs or whatever else, which are terrific, and kind of what we traditionally think about historically with universities and climate change and their role in the environment. But I think what we're seeing increasingly so, and it's heartening, is how do we have a broader understanding of what community and campus is? How do we tap into and learn from those underheard voices? So for me, that's the kind of key things. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Orla. Sinead.
Thanks. So similar to Orla, I'm going to echo the word, I suppose 3 words: engagement, engagement, engagement. So I think that's how we are going to bring about any kinds of change and radical transformation within universities and beyond. So universities are typically somewhat insular institutions, and we've even seen an example of it today where so some people are working for many years, 15 years on this very important topic of degrowth, and yet a lot of people who I would meet on a day-to-day basis would not have heard that word, would not know what that means. So it's in that vein, myself and the now infamous John Barry and Dr. Cal McKeown, we organised an event to bring people together from universities, including some people here like Hannah as well. And it was a very, I guess, like Julius Steinberger said, the aim was democracy. The aim was to have that conversation from the bottom up. So not really to be like this, where, you know, some people are sitting on a stage and some people are down there. It was very kind of flat structure. So we brought university staff, university students, and members of the community, including environmental activists, together to speak about the question, what should higher education institutions do about the planetary crisis? In the awareness that we would have no sage on the stage. We weren't trying to teach people anything because there's already so much information in the room. And yet we came to the conclusion that pretty much in order to change the university, we need to unlearn, we need to change so many our research structures, where we get our funding, like Jennie said, and also how we engage, for example, by, I mean, who wasn't touched by Liam's beautiful introduction or the poetry? This is how we communicate and engage with people. We need to use more art forms. We need to, the university needs to be the community. I suppose the last thing I'll say, and I'm a psychologist, and I guess I'm very interested in behavior and how to change behavior. And how I suppose how change comes about. What I see is, like, you know, obviously the very strong agreement that growth needs to go and we need to take ourselves to degrowth. So how do we get from that growth to the degrowth? Well, if there's going to be a system, if a system is going to change, or even an individual behavior, if there's between that one state and another, there's chaos. There's chaos, and that's really what we can expect. And that chaos might feel like conflict. It might feel like discomfort. It might feel, and I guess the idea is that in that chaos, how we bring about the reorganization of degrowth is to talk to each other, to talk to everybody, and try to make sense to everybody, not just in the realm of academia, but further and beyond that.
Thanks, and just, I don't want to reiterate what's already gone ahead, and good luck, Linda, when you come in the response to your question, but maybe just bringing it out to a different scale. I'm a geographer after all. Just to reflect on an experience that I had post-COVID, 2021, 2022, I was lucky enough to be part of an independent group of 14 experts from around the globe in higher education, and we were tasked by UNESCO, the United Nations Agency on Education, to explore the role of universities in relation to the admittedly flawed Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly SDG 4, about an inclusive and accessible education system for all. And I suppose my point to start off with is that we talk about the university, but there are many different types of universities internationally, and particularly in the higher education sector. No one university is the same. They all have particular histories, and the one we're in today has an immensely long history, and that has huge benefits, but also brings with it challenges and constraints. And what we were tasked to do by UNESCO was to reflect on a statement of pathways to future possibility transformations and the role that universities would have in that. And the three pathways we came up with kind of resonate with those points that have already been made by panelists today. But there were really three parts, and this is recognizing the immense contribution that universities have made internationally throughout history, but also recognizing, has been pointed out, that those major achievements have brought with them major problems and challenges for people and the planet. So essentially what we came down to were three key areas of action for universities in order to transform education to meet the goals of sustainability. And these were around integration, so interdisciplinarity, but even transdisciplinarity. And it's great again to have Linda here with a chair of engineering and arts, demonstrating radical interdisciplinarity. And these are the kinds of approaches that we are going to need. And I guess this is the area where, in part, to address the issue of the subject of economics, is that it's crazy to teach economics in isolation from subjects like physics and ecology, because it suggests that these things are separate when they are intimately related. It's absolutely wrong to do that. So we have to have some means and mechanisms, structures, institutions, and processes which allow this integration of different knowledges and coming together. And that leads us on to the second point, which was about being open as universities to diverse ways of knowing and diverse ways of being, and recognizing the value of different forms of knowledge from different places and from different people, and ensuring that those voices have a means to be discussed, debated, and included in plans and futures, whether that's teaching, learning, research, whether it's about managing the institution that we are physically in today. And that leads on to the third point, and it resonates very much with the previous speaker here, which is around the idea that we need to collaborate. We need to work with social partners. We need to diversify the people that we talk to, and I think resonates with Jennie's point there about the corporate capture of universities as a business, and the need to find different forms of collaboration which promote the kinds of ideals. I mean, we say that we need education in order to learn, but we don't, in order to progress, we need a particular type of education. So I think I'll leave it there and pass on to the next.
Thank you, and thanks so much to the organisers for being part of this panel. I suppose thinking back to Bio's comments actually on the need to go upstream, universities are the upstream, right? We train the economists, the people who go on to be politicians, the people who make these decisions, the people who go out and vote for them. So it's really, we need to use our superpower, which is education, to make sure that everybody is involved in this rethink that we desperately need to do in order to move back within planetary boundaries and to meet everybody's needs to really see a well-being economy. And so I've been really interested in how we leverage exactly these kinds of lessons, what we need to do from an educational perspective to reach our students, to reach everybody that we interact with, because we know that those effects and that learning will ripple out through society and has immense transformative potential. And I suppose what I've been really interested in is why we're not doing that. You know, the universities are just not doing enough. You know, keep cups and wildflower meadows are great, but they are not what we need to do. We need to transform everything that we do, but particularly what we're teaching students. And when we look at like what stands in the way of these kinds of transformations, we can, you know, I put our blame squarely at the foot of the government. Has been defunding universities for well over a decade now, driving us towards more corporate relationships, driving unnecessary, undesirable competition, driving us towards chasing rankings, producing more and more and more growth, right? We've had to grow in order to match or to make up for this shortfall in government funding. But we've also kind of internalized, many of us have internalized, you know, the new norms that have arisen out of that pressure for growth. And now many of us to spend our time chasing those KPIs and those outputs. And we don't have time, right? We don't have the headspace, we don't have the time to engage with the biggest challenge of this time, which is our climate and biodiversity crisis and our need to address the root cause of that, which is our focus on our country, our government, the global north's focus on economic growth as the be all and end all. So we need a well-being university, just like we need a well-being economy. We need to support staff, give them the time, remove these perverse incentives for growth of our own outputs as well as within the university. So I've worked a little bit on adapting Kate Rayworth's donut model, for example, of donut academia, talking about how we need a safe social foundation of community, collaboration, meaningful work, academic freedom, of course, with responsibility, and a protection of our human as well as the planetary boundaries. So commercialization, competition, and individualization, individualism, we need to reduce some of those and bring us back to within an academic donut, socially just and ecologically safe space. So with that, I'll pass on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Anna, you're right. I'm sitting here thinking, can I add anything to those wonderful comments? And Claire, you even made the funding point that I usually have to make. Maybe I would just, I don't know whether I'm saying anything new here, but maybe I would just say 3 points. And so first of all, I think a lot of universities are uniquely placed to genuinely engage in long-term thinking if we choose to. So most of the organizations, the political system and everything we engage in is really, really short term. And there is a stat that I quote, so one of the networks, Trinity's in, 85% of the universities in it are older than the states they're in. And I think there's something to be said for kind of, I agree with Anna that can hold you back, but can also, you know, equip you to do that long-term thinking. And I heard a phrase recently that somebody used to describe actually the EU. And they said that the EU was always half old and half new. And I kind of think that about Trinity, that we're always half old and half new. And it's how a university can kind of balance that deep long-term experience. And there's very simple things in this university that we don't do. We don't recognize the long-term impact of the decisions we're even making on a daily basis. So I think that's one thing that's really important. The second thing touches on what Anna was talking about, interdisciplinarity, but I would kind of maybe use an engineering phrase and say, I think universities are really good at systems thinking. And one of the really complicated things we face is there's kind of nothing you can do that actually doesn't have a positive and negative impact. And it's kind of sometimes playing whack-a-mole and things. So I think that education piece that Claire spoke about is central, but why it's central here is because of the multiple disciplines that can be brought to bear on that. So it's not just about that education from your own discipline's perspective, but that kind of multiple perspective. And then maybe the final point to make, and it takes up on the engagement point and the kind of creativity point. To me, there are kind of key diagrams that exist, and maybe I just think very visually, that those diagrams are catalyst for kind of greater thinking. And actually one is the donut economics that you spoke about. Basically, it's thinking of the word in a circle, which I suppose is so connected. But the other, actually, our Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action was using it this morning in an update to college on sustainability. And it's the one, the Ed Hawkins climate stripes with the people underneath it. And it relates to what Hannah was saying, where you actually think of how old you are and how old you will be as the climate changes, but more importantly, how old the next generation will be. So I think universities are great points of creativity that sometimes can produce these magical objects that can be, I suppose, a catalyst for kind of rethinking. And they're just two examples I picked, not from here, there's plenty from here too, but they're, you know, I think it can help in that way too.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you for keeping to your 3 minutes. And there's an awful lot to pull out there, but one common thread that I heard coming through, well, I'll take two common threads. One being interdisciplinarity across bringing together the, you know, from thermodynamics to Shakespeare, from the physical systems to art, imagination, and the really crucial importance of making students, making our research appreciate the multifaceted, the really complex nature of the solutions that we're proposing maybe for sustainability. I mean, I teach engineers. They typically don't have any exposure to issues around justice, around creativity, even economics. And at the same time, you pointed out that we have economic students who don't get exposure to ecological limits or physical limits. So the first question I want to put you in, and please let me know who wants to go first. What model can we follow for teaching interdisciplinarity, for making well-rounded students in this world of specialists? And in the university, we are very good at being specialist. We often teach in silos, we research in silos, even our language is the language of specialists. How do we teach interdisciplinarity and how do we create a generation of generalists who understand all dimensions of sustainability?
I have the microphone, so I could. I think there's a core concept that needs to be dealt with up front, and it's a phrase that I came across a long time ago, but find very important, and it's the notion of epistemic injustice, and it's the kind of privileging of certain knowledge making over others. So I think it doesn't really matter what structure you have or how you bring, there's brilliant ideas out there, but the bottom line is some knowledge is privileged over others. And that is repeated time and time again. You see it in terms of who gets grants and who doesn't for work. You see it in terms of what's signaled as important in a university and what isn't. And as long as that's the case, I don't think it matters what the structure is. And I'll give a very simple example. I remember a number of years ago being at an art event, and all of the artists at the event had to justify why they were relevant. And I was there as an engineer thinking, we never stand up and say, I'm relevant because, you know, it was just an automatic given. So there's brilliant ideas, there's huge programs in every one of the universities we're involved in that bring people together. There's fantastic interdisciplinary research. There's all sorts of schemes, there's all sorts of undergraduate and postgraduate courses, but as long as you do not value things and society doesn't, I think it doesn't matter, would be the kind of way I look at it.
Yeah, I suppose how radical an answer do you want? So, well, you know, fuck degrees, but like, you know, who actually needs them? You know, why don't people come together in spaces and discuss with each other, listen to each other? That's how to be interdisciplinary. That's how to not value some knowledge more than others. That's how to create equality, which is what we're all about. So, you know, take away assessments, just create spaces for people to learn and to teach. You know, we all have something to learn, we all have something to give. While I'm on the mic and before I hand it over, I just want to give a quick plug. If you want more of these kinds of conversations, if you want to be radical, please, if you have any interest at all in higher education, whether you're already involved or not, Jennie already mentioned the Climate Justice Universities for Higher Education thingy that we've started to organise, which is the first event in Galway that I was involved in organising. Then we had one in Belfast, Dublin. Now we'll go to Cork, the next province. So we're going around the country, and everybody's pretty much welcome. If you want to find out more, talk to Jennie, myself, Claire, or John Barry.
Just a small add-on, kind of getting it back to degrowth specifically. Like, one of the first speakers talked about how, okay, there's a lot written now in terms of the intellectual foundations of what we mean by degrowth. You know, these 5 premises. Look at Jason Hickel, if you. But I think a really positive movement academically within the field is that to getting down to the level of policies and everyday life. And we see this with the movement within the EU to fund these kinds of projects, and it's not disciplinary specific. So I work, for example, on work time reduction, and I think I work with people across lots of different disciplines on that, and it's a specific policy. And there's constraints in working in interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary, and there's always the issues of what gets valued more than others. But I think that as we think about policies in everyday lives, it's a really good way to think about things in terms of our teaching and research, a way to approach it it isn't rooted in kind of the isms of the past or subject disciplines.
Yeah, and I'll just respond to the question about interdisciplinarity by saying that this is exactly why we need to reimagine higher education, because we need to have a mission, public good mission, for a disruptive, chaotic, challenging future. And, you know, that's why I've been writing about a climate justice university, like a university that was focused on a better future for all, equity, stability, health, basic needs being met. If that was the mission of our universities, we wouldn't have the disciplinary boundaries that you're talking about, right? Like, we would be able to bring people together in new ways that are outside the disciplinary boundaries. So I think we need to really open up our imaginations about what's possible and how to leverage these amazing anchor institutions in our society that has so much power, but they are not being leveraged for what society needs right now. And so I think we have to let go, unlearn, be willing to exnovate, move away from things that we know are not working, and don't be afraid of change. I mean, I think that's, and I know that's hard because higher education institutions are so ingrained in the patterns and the things that we've done for generations or decades, or our annual cycles and everything. But we need to, we're in a time of increasing disruption, and the change is going to come, and the change is happening, and we are not engaging with the change in the way that we could.
Thanks. And just if I come in on the responding to Jennie and really Linda a little bit, I think, one thing is that there are examples of doing things differently. I am clear that structures are important. Like there's agents, we have agents, but it's a structuration in this point. So we have to look for other ways of doing things. Close to home, Utrecht established itself as a sustainability university back in 2016, using its campus as a living laboratory where people come together from different disciplines to talk about challenges and work on things together. In Brazil, the Federal University ABC doesn't have any departments. It's a new university, so they didn't have the structures to build on, so they were able to start from scratch, and they didn't develop disciplines, they developed courses, and so it's got a different approach to that. You can look at the Danish folk academies if we're looking for non-assessed kind of skills-based exchange of knowledge and those kinds of things. There are examples, I think, out there that we can take inspiration from. And there's an International Climate Alliance of Universities, and there are no Irish universities a member of this alliance currently. And I think collaborating amplifies voice, it gives security, but also comfort for those people who are pushing into unknown territory. And I think we do need to look out. We're looking down, and part of this looking down and looking short term is the fact that we are being increasingly stifled by bureaucratic administrative processes of documenting under the kind of aegis of bureaucratic efficiency, not about the efficiency of the goals that we are tasked to deliver as academics in universities around teaching, research, and social change.
Thank you, Anna. Would you like to come in? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I've been given the 5-minute warning bell, so we'll make a sort of a rapid-fire last question, and this is a very good segue to, I suppose, my reflections is, and that Clare alluded to, that we're in some sense all part of a rat race. We're really chasing the publications, the income, and so on, and that is because higher education has been underfunded by government, and in some sense that leaves us dependent on private investment in our research, which I think limits the transformative nature of our universities if we're dependent on providing research for private industry. And I wonder if anyone would like to give reflections on that, on how the word corporate capture was used a number of times. Anything that you'd like to share on that topic?
I can probably just start very quickly and just say one of the things that an idea that I really like is that we don't have to just look at our carbon footprint or our ecological footprint. We have to look at our carbon shadow, the activities that we engage in, the relationships that we have, the corporate and industries that we make partnerships with, and what we teach. And the message that we send out into the community, and that we have to make sure that our carbon shadow is aligned with our values of a livable, sustainable future. So some people are starting to call it Scope 4 emissions, and we need to obviously tackle those.
Yeah, and I would also just add that the financialization and academic capitalism and the way that our universities have become like businesses is preventing the work that needs to be done, and that I think we can recognize that it's leading to higher education as being an under-leveraged resource for society. And I think that's one of the things, again, I'll make a plug for the Climate Justice Union for Higher Education. We are collectively coming together to advocate for universities to be thought of as essential for our climate action plan, for our ecological diversity goals and all of that, and therefore should be invested in with the public good mission in a much more holistic way so that we can deliver on those.
Just a tiny practicality on that in terms of calculating the carbon shadow. A really interesting and very practical proposal that I've seen is, when we go to do research, we usually have to do like an ethics form, IRB, whatever, depending on where you are. But similarly, within the institutional administrative bodies, that we could also have such a process to think about from whom we take funding, thinking about the kind of implications in a real practical way. And we have the processes. It's just about a matter of kind of putting them onto kind of a new avenue.
Maybe I'll be wholly unpopular in saying this, but I do think there's a really important role for the university to engage with enterprise. And I think there's very constructive ways to do that. I think very often, if you do want to get funding, right, unfortunately, we're forced into a conversation that's all about the university's contribution to the economy. But I think a really crucial thing here is bringing that understanding that the economy has no foundation if nature isn't strong. And, so if I think we really, really want to transform things, and the questions that you're asking here is making sure that the world of enterprise fundamentally understands that link, that part of that systems thinking I was talking about earlier, the fact it's dependent on it. And this is slightly random, but I was thinking earlier, does anyone here familiar with the Cybersyn Stafford Beer thing that he tried to do to model the economy of Chile in the 1970s? Yeah, it's a project I find really fascinating, but he tried to model the whole economy of Chile so that workers could make decisions and locally. And I thought it was really, really interesting. But what's missing from the model is nature. And in fact, actually, if we were able to think of, systems like that where nature plays a huge role and they inform our decisions, whether centrally or locally, I think it's really important. And for me, that's why enterprise has to be in the mix in that way.
Absolutely. So I'm going to draw the session to a close, but I think it's been very clear that, to quote from that paper by Callum McGeown and John Barry, if universities are to contribute to societal transformation, universities themselves must undergo transformation that explicitly and systematically reorients academic practices around social, ecological protection and priorities. So I want to thank the panel very much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.